Welcome everyone to another episode of Subscription Ecommerce Live. I'm Ashley Gattuso. We are joined here today by Brad Hoos of the Outloud Group. He's going to talk to us all about how subscription sellers should be taking advantage of influencer marketing. Before we get started, we'll do our only promotional bit that we do here at Subscription Ecommerce Live and tell you that this is brought to you by ARPU. That's getarpu.com. We provide upcoming shipment notifications that increase AOV and LTV while reducing churn with 2-click upsells and delays. This also includes custom messages based on subscription products or renewal counts. So you can actually play out your loyalty program and give them those things they get for free when they have been a subscriber for 6 months, 12 months, etc. in those emails. Let them claim them in those emails. These are for recharge customers on Shopify or BigCommerce. All right, Seth, let's get rolling. If you don't mind dropping in a couple of links and letting people know that we'd love for them to ask questions. This is a very casual meeting. Our expert is here to answer not just my questions, but your questions. So about Brad, can you introduce yourself? Tell us what you've been up to in your professional career and what brought you to the Outloud Group and what y'all do.
Actually, I'd be happy to, but I first have to say that, yeah, I mean, you're officially an influencer. I mean, you've got the product advocacy down, piece of content that people want to see and advocating for a product. So your influencer game is strong, and I'd like to think that I'm qualified to make that call. So here at the Outloud Group, we're about a 70-person influencer marketing agency. So we work with a lot of big brands, a lot of D2C brands that you'd be familiar with. So we work with Athletic Greens, we work with Grubhub, we work with Simply Safe and KiwiCo and Keeps and Bespoke Post and a number of large modern brands. As far as my background, I like to say I'm a recovering management consultant and a recovering engineer. So worked for years in engineering and then worked in management consulting and sort of got an opportunity to sort of stumble into entrepreneurship. So previously created a coding bootcamp program, and here at the Outloud Group, we're really focused on helping brands understand the right strategy for influencer and making things come to life through partnerships with creators. And so that's sort of the world that we're living and breathing here at the Outloud Group.
Excellent. Okay, so you touched on something that I think is fundamental before we even go into our topics, and that is, what does it mean for someone to be an influencer? Because I think we're all super intimidated by that word, and we imagine people with massive followings and big personalities.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that, because we use the term influencers and we call ourselves an influencer marketing agency, but creators don't call themselves influencers. They just call themselves creators, or maybe YouTuber or podcaster or TikToker, depending on what their primary platform is. So there's a lot of terms that are used synonymously. But for us, an influencer is basically someone who's developed meaningful trust and rapport with their audience. And speaking of terms that aren't well defined, there's micro, there's nano, there's pico, there's mega influencers. There is no common definition to any of those terms that are universally accepted. But for us as an influencer agency, we're typically working together with brands for creators who have an audience for any individual piece of content that are averaging about 25 to 30,000 and above viewers or consumers of that content per post. So that's kind of the sweet spot where we operate. We certainly have worked with a lot of other, all sizes of creators, the biggest of the big creators, and we've done some micro campaigns, but generally speaking, that's kind of where we start. But I think it's interesting too, and is the distinction between influencers and celebrities. So celebrities are people who a lot of people know, but influencers are people who have a circle of individuals who really trust them. And sometimes that's at scale of celebrities, and sometimes it's not. but it's that subject matter expertise, regardless of what that subject matter is, right? Underwater basket weaving, how to apply foundation, fishing, hunting, whatever it is, you have that sort of trust where people think you're credible and want to hear what you have to say.
Excellent. Okay, so this is like a little side story, but influencers aren't a new thing. My husband became an influencer in 2005 with a hat cam and a metal detector, pre-YouTube, pre-Facebook, using old school forums. Do you remember the really old style forums where metal detecting
AOL style forums?
Yes. So metal detecting hobbyists were hanging out there, and he developed a video series that he used like Blogger to like learn the code that he needed to use to make it a vlog. Like this was before hero cams. Like we actually mounted this to his hat, but people knew him in that community. I mean, I guess you would call it a micro influencer, but he built a business where he takes people metal detecting, off of that being his side hobby back when he was in pharmaceutical sales. So like people who, I like the way you phrase that. It's people who have an audience that trusts them. Yeah. And so he was doing that long before he decided to sell them something. He was creating an entertaining educational content series for them.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. No, it's true. I mean, and influencers have been around even like for generations, right? So like our grandparents would know the influencers on their local radio station, where it's like, hey, this is Bob from WXYZ. I had a great burger last night at the Village Grill. Once you get onto the Village Grill, enjoy a nice juicy burger, tell them that Bob from WXYZ sent you when you talk to Jimmy, the bartender, right? Like that stuff's been happening for a long time, and it really does work. It's really fascinating where the topic or the approach isn't new in terms of third-party advocacy, but the medium now exists where we can actually roll things out at scale and be really effective. And that part is super fun.
Love that. Okay, and so the last thing I'll tack onto that, and then I'll start asking you some topic related questions that are like subscription related, is that I firmly believe, and this is not some new thought that I have had, right? That this is a highly circulated idea or belief that people trust people more than they trust brands, right? That's happening in the press and that's happening in product and product marketing, right? So do you 100%. Feel like that is the I don't know the right word for this, but like the foundation of why influencer marketing or word of mouth is so powerful?
Yeah, I do. I think, simply put, we call influencer marketing word of mouth at scale, because we live in a world where people hate to be sold to, and we go out of our way to have ad blockers on our laptop, and we really try to avoid any situation where someone's trying to get us to do something that we don't want to. But yeah, with influencers, there's actually really we could nerd out on the psychological value here, but people have chosen to follow and subscribe to this individual, and they actually want to know about what they're doing, what their interests are, what their tastes are. And there's something in psychology called the halo effect, where basically if someone is known to be trustworthy and smart in a particular domain area, then we, as people who know them, actually apply that same trustworthiness and knowledge to other areas outside of their domain expertise. So the example is, I have a really good friend who's a doctor, and he's a very smart medical doctor, and people know that, and people like him and they trust him and they'll ask him medical questions. That's fantastic. But then I'll find it amusing, there's not anything wrong with it, but people will start to then ask him questions about where to invest money and financial stuff. And it's like, well, wait a minute, like he does not have any domain expertise at all in here as a doctor to be able to talk about financial decision making, but people trust him and they know he's smart, so they assume he'll know he'll know more in other areas. And frankly, like that's a really fascinating foundational element of influencer, where if we know someone is a fantastic fisherman and we're super interested in all they share with their content around fishing, we're actually going to be really interested of like what he cooks or what she cooks for dinner. And it's like, well, that's great news for HelloFresh, who we work with as well, in terms of being able to tap into that power of influence, even though like that creator doesn't have any domain expertise around food necessarily, but yet the audience still very much values that opinion. So it's super fascinating. I might be going down a rabbit hole here, but we've always really like loved to lean into the psychology of influencer where we can.
I like that. I could get very rabbit holey myself with that concept. You've influenced me, and now I want to influence you. Back and forth. All right. So how can subscription brands, like, why are they uniquely positioned to benefit from influencer marketing? Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's great about, I mean, first of all, what's great about subscription brands and influencers is the same thing that's great about subscription brands in general, which is once you get a customer, they're likely to stick around and you're going to generate recurring revenue on an ongoing basis. And so in general, your lifetime value of your customer is going to be higher, and you're going to have a higher willingness to pay with respect to acquiring a customer. So that's not necessarily an influencer. That's just congratulations if you're in the recurring revenue business. You've chosen a good arena to be in. But with respect to influencers, one of the things that we've seen repeatedly with our brand partners, and this obviously can't be seen until really years after we've been working together, but is that new subscribers who come from influencers tend to have a higher lifetime value and tend to be stickier than the average bear when it comes to new customers. And I think so much of that comes down to sort of like the trust and the positive affinity that a creator has developed with their audience. So when that creator's sharing, the good news about a brand, I think people feel a bit of a stronger emotional connection to the brand than someone who's just buying the product to solve a problem. And the good news here is like the data does bear that out in terms of customers being stickier. So I mean, obviously when it comes to subscription products, there's so many, I should say not even products, but products and services. There's such a huge range of offerings that it's tough to nail down what it is, because I think it's more of like product category and product market fit with the right creators. But inherently the recurring revenue model with creators does work well because of the trust factor, so that we talked about, and that translates into longer term connection between that customer and the brand. And that's a huge positive, I think, for recurring revenue brands.
Excellent. Okay. So when I first started looking into what subscription businesses might be doing with influencer marketing, and this was kind of back when we early started with ARPU, and I was just trying to kind of learn our audience, right? Because that's my role, figure out what subscription merchants care about. And obviously marketing and customer acquisition and retention are high on that list. And so I think I joined a couple of Facebook groups dedicated to subscription selling, that kind of stuff. And I ran into a lot of people that were advising, hiring influencers to do unboxing, or sending influencers your beautiful packaging to be unboxed. And so that became my first understanding of how a subscription seller might use influencer marketing. But I've since evolved my thinking, right? And I'd love for you to tell me if it's going in the right direction, but that beyond unboxing, that there's kind of a world of what you can do with an influencer, depending on your product, especially if your product is, if the subscription to your product is for like some sort of lifestyle transformation or for a long-term relationship, or has established a long-term relationship between the brand and the user, so that like the accrual or the compounding interest potential of using that product for more than 2 months, for possibly 6 months, for possibly a year, et cetera, like especially if there are health benefits, right, over the long haul, then that gives you like kind of a whole different way of being able to use influencers. And maybe that is what impacts that higher LTV, is if an influencer is showing not just the like, you should subscribe and get this pretty box and open it and use the product, but like, you should be in relationship with this brand because I've been in relationship with this brand for X months and it has done this for my body or for my way I work or the way I live, or the whatever the aspirational goal is that they're trying to attain by using that product.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's one of the great things. Well, here, let me tell you a story, is that I feel like everyone I know who buys a new car, whether it's, truly new or if it's new to you, is that people kind of learn most everything about the car within like the first 4 or 5 days. But then at week 3 or 4, sometimes month 3 or 4, you discover that new feature and you're like, oh, I never knew this existed here. Like, this is pretty cool, like little feature I have in my car. And so I do think there's some element of like freshness and newness for products that creators can communicate to their audience for sure. And you're absolutely right, is that like there's different use cases too. So there's so many different ways that you could advocate for a product. So, for Athletic Greens, yes, like you could talk about how you feel like you have more energy over a day, a month, a day, a week, a month. And I think that could work really well. Or like a product like Simply Safe, where like, man, 3 months after you got it, you actually were super freaked out in the middle of the night. And you actually could look at the cameras and see like, oh, it's actually a raccoon out there. And I feel so much better and safer now. So I think all those are like definite good use cases. And we all get in our own rut in terms of how we go about things from a day-to-day perspective. And again, if there's someone we look up to and like a creator who's talking about a product that we're now part of that community, we're going to be excited about seeing them use things, differently over time. So there's just sort of inherently a way you can keep things fresh, keep things stickier. And then honestly, like seeing the creator use a product and knowing that I use the product, that makes me feel even more so that I'm part of that community too. And we see that especially true in gaming. So this is a bit of a tangent, but so we have a gaming practice as well. And the gaming community is a little bit like Reddit, where like initially very, very skeptical to anyone, trying to push anything or enter it in. But once you recognize that this person or this brand is truly part of the community, then they're widely accepted. And it's like, no, they're one of ours. And that's sort of a fun thing that happens with creators and their audiences as well. And like we see that bear out very much with Grubhub and the gaming community. Like the gaming community now very much resonates with Grubhub as their food delivery service provider of choice. And I think that exists over time when you see a creator continuing to use a product. So sorry, Ashley, that was probably more than you bargained for with that one.
Not at all, because it plays very well into previous conversations that we have had. Specifically, I'm thinking back to like Eli Weiss when he was at Olipop, and he was talking about creating like a subscriber journey. And then maybe both Kristen LaFrance and like she's at Repeat, and Jamie Levy at Shopify Plus, they both had like a strong sense of what it means to be a part of a community. And that's a really interesting thing because it's quite an informal community that the influencer is creating, right? But it's just like, I like this, I'm subscribed to it, I'm using it, you can be on my journey with me. Right? Like it's not like go get in a Facebook group and everybody talk about, like my Jillian Michaels Facebook group where we're all working out and kind of trying to, encourage each other. It's more of a shadow of the leader. This person's having success with this. I trust this person. I'm also on this journey with them, kind of hive mentality that has no like little place where it has to live. It just exists. Ooh, it's very meta. In a scary way. All right. So then finding the right influencers for subscription brands, like how do they go about doing that? And like, how do you find the right people to drive that higher LTV success?
Right. Yeah. So that's sort of the $1 million or the $1 billion question, depending on the brand. So from our perspective, and again, we're an influencer agency, and we're working with big high growth brands typically. So we have the advantage of being able to use a ton of data in terms of historical performance, right? So we're big believers that the best predictor of future performance is historical performance. And so we're always leveraging what's worked for different brands with, targeting similar demographics to be predictive of what we would recommend and what's going to be successful for other brands to either acquire new subscription customers or to retain them. So that's a big piece for us. But I think most folks are probably not going to be in that bucket of the bigger brands where you can sort of leverage an agency and do that things. So and by the way, we have a D2C business ourselves where we're much smaller and we're engaging with customers. And so I think there's a lot of different approaches that you can use, but I think the common theme is try things out and know that you're going to fail and fail when the stakes are low in terms of engaging with creators. So as marketers, so many of us, we try to be so analytical and try to figure things out, by segmenting. It's like, hey, what's the vertical, what's the location? Tell me what the specific demographic numbers are for the audience. And that definitely matters. I don't want to dismiss it, but especially if you're sort of early stage working with influencers, I would say, like, hey, work with smaller creators and trust your gut in terms of the creators that are going to really be excited about your brand, and just see who's excited, right, as you engage with them. And so, a lot of times with creators, you can engage with them at low to no cost for in exchange for product or trying out your service, and then let the creators kind of go where they may with that content. And I think that works really well. So I mean, even for some of the big brands that we worked with that I mentioned, a lot of them are still running micro and nano campaigns with really small creators. So we always recommend doing that. Like, hey, do it for free as long as you can. But we always want to say, like, hey, is the juice worth the squeeze? And that's something you really need to think about as a brand. Like, hey, is this where I want to be spending all this time, energy, and effort? And then also there's of course a brand risk associated with any creator. And it's tougher to vet when you're sort of doing the spray and pray method of using a lot of creators. So that's something just to be aware of. But I think in general, I would look for creators that are in the verticals that you've found through your Facebook or meta advertising, your paid social, that typically works well. Like, what are their interests? What's their demographics? Find creators who fit in that, and then really lean into figuring out what are the creators that are actually excited about your product. And if you have a creator that's really excited about your product but wants to get paid, or people who are just kind of like, yeah, okay, like I'll take a look at it. Like I think you're going to get a lot more value. Time and time again, we've seen is the creators who are really actually excited about your product. And so the biggest thing is a subjective thing, but it's identifying creators who really do care about what you're doing and are excited about being able to incorporate your product or service into their lives.
I think a lot about like, I would feel like one of the steps of the process, right, is beyond figuring out who those people might be, is looking at what they've done for other brands, right? Because I think a lot of the time, a marketing team can decide to work with an influencer and then wreck it by not letting them be creative, right? So they suddenly want to shape what form the content takes, when I see the entire reason behind using the influencer is to give them some creative freedom to work your product into what's already working for them and their audience, right? So that it is not a distraction or divergence from it, but that it feels organically included. I feel like the best creators, they are telling a story that they weave your product into. So like the ongoing series that they're producing feels like something you want to watch, and then suddenly you realize it's an ad.
Yes, sing it louder for the people in the back. No, totally agree with you, Ashley. And you know, we've kind of have a framework behind this that we like to use, and we call it brand voice versus brand advocacy. And I think the trap so many brands fall into is like, we've spent all this time, energy, and effort figuring out our brand voice. We know the right messaging, we know the right colors, we know the right words to use, we know the right words not to use. Like, we dominate brand voice, and that's great. You know, push that shit out to your audience through your brand's channel. Like, full support of that. But don't come to an influencer and ask them to speak in y'all's vocabulary, y'all's approach, y'all's words to their audience, because it's going to be weird, right? The analogy that I use, like, hey, my wife has an amazing family and I love hanging out with them. But if I were to behave in the exact same way I behave around my nuclear family, like my brothers, sisters, and parents, like, it would just be off, right? I'm not a different person, but like, hey, we behave differently in different situations. It would be kind of weird. And so audiences, if you know, are going to know right away if a creator is saying something that's forced. And even if they do a really good job of, you know, sticking to quote unquote the script, the way that a brand wants to do it, but the audience is still going to know it's not them. And brands are trying so hard, you know, it's like the Tommy Boy scene, you know, I won't go into that, but, and it's like the brand's trying so hard to make it be perfect and great, and we really want this to work. And all they're doing is really taking a biscuit and like crumbling it up to pieces. And whereas if they just said, hey, creator, like, here's the key things we want you to mention, go, they'd be a lot more successful with that. So I totally agree. And if, you know, there's one thing that we always recommend to brands, is have the right mindset to do influencer marketing. And it's like, you got to take your hands off the wheel and let the creator drive.
I love it. I love it. For some reason, this is making me think about this house we bought in rural Virginia outside of Richmond. It's like an 1820s farmhouse, 3,000 square feet of like not very well insulated old house, right? And our intention was to get it on the National Register of Historic Places so that we could then get tax credits and to be good stewards of this historic home, right? And we would have people walk through this house and tell us, you know, like, you'd have so much more kitchen counter space if you would just take out that servant's staircase. And we're like, but that servant's staircase is like an architectural element of this house, right? And you cannot be on the register if you are disturbing the architectural integrity. So I would relate that and say, like, it is not going to be the same for you using an influencer if you are asking them to do things that tweak or kind of like put little, I don't know, crutches on, or like impede their integrity shining through. Like, then they become someone who might be not trusted anymore. And your campaign has fallen flat because you have kind of like exposed them as someone willing to bend this far for a sponsor.
Yes,
kind of
no,
situation.
that's such a great analogy. I love it. I think it's so true. And one of the things that we like most, and this might sound counterintuitive as an influencer agency, we love creators who say no to brand sponsors a lot, because that means they're really only going to be advocating for brands that they truly believe in. And guess what? When they truly believe in it, it's going to be more effective, and their audience is going to like that. And like honestly, there's a lot of like influencer tools and platforms out there to connect brands and influencers. And we sort of call that the hand raise tools, where, you know, creators are going to raise their hand and say, hey, I want to work with that brand. And we've run a lot of data to use those and see how it goes. And they don't perform as well, because so many creators are on there just to try to get deals and not do things that are going to authentically like share with their audience that they like and they're into. So it almost be like, you know, the person who's you know, buying that house, you know, just to be able to like tear it down and resell it. You know what I mean? It's just that kind of defeats the whole purpose of why you'd want to buy that house. And similarly, I think it defeats the purpose for why you'd want to work with influencers. Like you really want true third-party advocacy, and people are smart. And frankly, I think like the biggest risk to the to the influencer marketplace and ecosystem going forward is creators falling away from being discerning in terms of what brands they'll advocate for. And, you know, to the extent that you know, occurs at a significant rate, I think it's just going to erode the credibility and erode the influencer ecosystem as a whole.
Okay, so my takeaway from that is, if you want their audience's attention, let them get it in the way they're used to getting it, instead of attempting to mold that into the way you think your brand should get it. Because if your brand could get that attention, you'd be doing it already, right? Like, you need that influencer's way of communicating with their audience. And that's not to say you can't be collaborative, but I think you put a little trust into what's working for them before you say like, hey, let's totally change it because my CEO thinks blah, blah, blah. Right?
Yeah, you nailed it. And the other thing that's interesting is influencers' audience are generally speaking now like pretty nice niche groups of people that it's a lot harder to target now through Meta or any sort of paid campaign, because of all the privacy restrictions that are coming up. So influencer is actually a really nice way to segment or target your customers. And sometimes it can actually be more effective. Like, hey, if you really want people who are into finance, like historically people might have been like, oh, let's target the New York metropolitan area, you know, XYZ demographics. And now you can run an ad that's, you know, part of a YouTuber who's talking about like nuances of finance. Like, well, you really don't care if the person's in, you know, Topeka or Manhattan. If they're really deep into this topic, then let's make sure the content's getting in front of them. So influencer can be really good from a targeting perspective as well. So it's not only like creators have the audience, let them do their thing, and the brand can't connect with them. That's 100% true. But also it's a new, you know, it's a new way to be able to target and identify new groups of people that, you know, brands historically have been challenged to do, particularly in the post iOS 14 world.
Yeah, don't even start me on the headache that has created.
Too soon,
okay.
too soon.
It's so, yeah, I'm just gonna stop myself. So what do subscription brands really need to do to like make the most out of influencer marketing? Do you have like a list of things that if I were today, owner of brand X, and I want to get into this, like what do I need to start doing?
Yeah, I do think it's hard because there's so many things happening in influencer. We really see the convergence of paid social, user-generated content, and influencer. So that's sort of one mega trend that's happening. And I share that to say, well, influencer, if you're, you know, generally speaking, one of the questions we get is, when should we go into influencer? So there's kind of two answers to that. Well, one, it's once you've maxed out and seeing your primary acquisition channels plateau, a lot of that's SEM work and paid social. And the second is when you're ready to stop selling products and start building a brand. But I share all that to say, well, if you're a subscription business and you're still very much focused on acquisition and the paid social piece, absolutely influencer can work for you. And I would encourage brands to take a look at influencer paid social. And Facebook used to call this whitelisting. They've moved away from using that term, but whatever we call it, it's paid ads that are showing up from the influencer's account. So when you're scrolling with your thumb, you're seeing a piece of content from a creator, and it happens to be sponsored. And on the back end, yes, the brand is paying for that, but it's a really nice way to get into influencer, because one, you get the content from creators from a UGC perspective, and two is you can run these paid ads out, yes, to the influencer's audience, but also to lookalike audience, to the brand audience, and to different interest group. Really, you can take it to whoever you want from a paid perspective. But I think that's a reasonably new advancement in the world of influencer marketing, which is it's kind of a bridge between paid social and what a lot of people have thought of sort of traditional influencer. And then the other thing I think, which is true for any marketing campaign, but we see this in influencer, it can be a bit of a hot mess, is brands really need to know what are you trying to achieve before they start saying, give me some of that influencer stuff. Because influencer is a full funnel program, right? Where there's value from an awareness perspective. You have people who like, trust, and want them to sell to you, right? That has value. And oh, by the way, there's a big halo effect where your cost of your paid social is going to go down. You're going to be spending less on paid search as well because of the influencer and people seeing this content. So that's a big piece in terms of the awareness consideration. You're going to be able to direct people to your website, test the quality of those visits. The bounce rate, the number of pages, the duration, all that sort of stuff, and conversion is pretty straightforward in terms of what that looks like. But brands really do need to understand what their goals are and where their challenges are, and with that, there's a lot of really good options with respect to influencer that you could take to sort of step on the gas and scale things. But there's definitely like a need to really understand what your objectives are. And so I think that's like the most fundamental piece from a sort of quantitative perspective when it comes to brands in influencer. But on the other side, in terms of like the relational piece, we talked about this earlier, but let creators create, let them do their thing, know that they're going to need to have the space to create, to be able to do good content. So I think that's sort of the softer side. But there's a lot of options in influencer. It's not easy to understand what the right approach is for your brand. And so I think really crystallizing that is just a critical part in the journey for a subscription business in influencer.
Okay, so this begs the question, this goes through my head a lot, of you spoke about like when certain tactics are starting to plateau is a good time to think about this. And I think that one of the major problems that brands have with social advertising, and I think B2B more than D2C, is that they're trying to use performance ads in the feed to get people to their site to do a thing. They're trying to lead capture, right? Especially B2B, but then D2C is trying to get you right to the site to buy the thing. And I feel like I've heard a conversation recently where it's actually smarter to set up campaigns that are more brand focused, that teach and educate in the feed without someone having to leave. So they're learning about your brand, what you do, et cetera. And that if you have a true desire to get them to your site to do a thing, that the thing you're sending them to do should be very closely aligned with like the activity they were just engaged in on the platform. So the example was going from TikTok to a beauty quiz about like skin tone or something, so that it's less come buy this thing and it is more learn more about our brand, and you're scrolling TikTok and now you're like just edges away from it and you're choosing some things in a quiz kind of thing. So have you seen people experimenting with direct response versus brand versus, like, I almost call that play, right? Like you're attempting to take them from play to another form of play.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a question. It's just a like, hey, let's talk about this.
No, I love it because I think like, you're right. Like the closer we can have the content of the creator be with like what the brand's trying to achieve and what the customers would want, the better that we are, right? In terms of having the video be thematic and super interesting. And there's long form content and there's short form content. They're very different from each other too, right? So like when we're talking about a YouTube video, well, if the YouTube video is just about the brand, which you can do, and we've done some really cool stuff with Shell and others from more of like a B2B perspective, like you need to know going in that if it's a dedicated video, it's going to be different than the content that people typically watch on that channel from the creator. And so it's probably not going to get as many views. And that's not necessarily bad because the audience is going to get to really kind of go a bit deeper into the brand. And when that happens, you definitely don't want it to be a hard sell in an infomercial, right? Like that's bad. So you want it to be something that is informative and gets the audience to kind of achieve the same thing, like, oh, like having fun, like I'm watching this content to be entertained. Oh, by the way, I'm also learning about this brand. So that's cool. But then for the shorter videos, I think that's like for whether it's Instagram Reels or TikTok or whatever the case may be, like I think there's a lot of different sort of calls to action that you can take and be really smart about it. I mean, I think that's where people have sort of moved away from, the social giveaways and contests by and large, which is good. But anything you can do to try to develop that sense of community is really valuable. So if it's a beauty brand and you're taking a beauty quiz, that's cool. Also, if you're like a car creator and you're just encouraging people to get involved in a conversation or check out a piece of content from a brand that's not actually about selling product, but it's just about the spirit of community. Like we definitely have seen that to be really effective. And it goes back to, I hate to harp on this, but the objectives, right? So if a brand, is I would say a little bit more patient and looking at things from a little bit more, full funnel perspective, there's a lot of really cool things you can do to, start to develop develop that audience and have them be part of the community. But, I would say the majority of brands, when they are getting into influencer, especially early on, they're very focused still on what can we do to drive a sale. And if we're trying to optimize for sale, then we would want to try to have the call to action be as closely connected with the cart as possible, in 99% of the cases, right? So that's kind of like how we've thought about it. But I do like more and more creativity in terms of having creators, to develop that sense of community as opposed to being, to pushing an audience just to make a purchase.
Excellent. Well, that wraps up my questions. I have one ARPU type question for you, but this is not a plugging ARPU thing. This is we'd love to get your opinion on an idea that we have that involves TikTok and my new Yorkie as a burgeoning pet influencer. And that is that we work with a lot of pet product and pet food brands. And the concept would be the subscription life of pets, and to create an ongoing series about pets who are subscribing to different products behind their owners' backs, and then receiving their ARPU emails and getting their products, but living the life of pets, but kind of following the Secret Life of Pets movie, talking animal kind of approach. So that is attempting to create influence from our own brand versus like going out and finding already established pet influencer. So I'm rethinking, should we do that, or should we create the account, but then should we go after our dog and cat influencers and have them interact with our account to bring attention to it?
Well, I love the thinking, right? And people love pets, and people love to share pet content as well. And oh, by the way, people start to look like their pets too. And so I think you could do a lot of fun stuff with that. And I think this is one of those kind of like throw out the rules. I mean, push it out from your brand or push it out from influencers. If you have fun, creative content, people are going to like it and engage with it, particularly if it's around their pets. But I think it would be pretty funny to maybe do a series where you do have an influencer, putting out content that's from their pet, and then y'all maybe, integrated into that in one or two episodes. But I think that could be a ton of fun. And you could also partner with like meme accounts to like go down the path of like dogs that look like their owners, and then how does that connect back to what they're trying to do with ARPU or whatever the case may be. I think
the trick, the challenge that I have, like the bridge I have to create is, yes, that's great if all pet owners think this is great, but it's ARPU merchants or potential ARPU merchants. So it's really recharge merchants who have to see and be entertained by this, because that's where the revenue would eventually come from, right? Yeah. So I've still got to kind of make that bridge and figure out, how do we get that in front of that right recharge type audience or subscription selling type audience? But we're in the thought process stage.
Well, you could definitely do influencer paid for that, push it out to the audience that and basically pose the question of like, what would you buy for your humans, if you saved all this money, through ARPU, or like drove all this extra revenue. So there's fun things that you could for sure, do.
I'll have to keep you posted.
All right, please do.
It's in the idea zone. Well, thank you so much, Brad. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can check us out at outloudgroup.com. We got all sorts of insights. We didn't really get a chance to talk a whole lot around research and measurement, but I promise you we nerd out there pretty significantly when it comes to understanding the values. So check out outloudgroup.com for that. Me personally, you can find me on Twitter. bhoos is my handle.
Excellent. Okay, well, let me know if you have a link to, you can just send an email to us, any resources that are on your website, and I'll include that in that replay follow-up email so people can go directly to that, since I hogged all of the airtime and didn't let us talk about research and metrics and things like that. So that could be chapter 2 for people who are putting their toe or their whole body into the rabbit hole of influencer marketing.
Or maybe they're doing an open house at a beautiful old home in rural Virginia, one of the two.
I watched we somehow ended up having a man who was in his 80s who had grown up in that house and was the 5th generation who had grown up in that house of that family before it was sold out of the family. And he was like over 6 feet tall. He had these huge feet, right? And he goes up the winder staircase and back down it. And it just naturally happened for him, like, because he had grown up in the house, that he turned his feet sideways as he went down the narrow stairs. So, do what the influencer tells you you should do, because they know when to turn their feet sideways.
Well, that definitely resonates because you can't tell, but I'm actually 6'4", and so I'm totally with you on the fact that the surface area as a percentage of the length of your foot is significantly less for
It's
tall people
important.
downstairs.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Brad, for joining us today. We'll see y'all again in 2 weeks when we have Nikki Elbaz on April 6th, and she's going to be talking about email copywriting, which is right up our alley. If you missed today's reminder email, I want to remind you to go check out the PS. I dropped in a little gift about gifts that your subscribers can give to other subscribers. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see y'all in 2 weeks.